think that it's very important to think about the issues we're talking about in what I would call the modern world, not just the secular world, because I think that in some ways poses a false dichotomy. I think, what is the view of religion in the modern world? And for me, the modern world is not the Treaty of Westphalia in the 1600s. It's the post-World War II world. I think probably our students and young people, at least in America, and actually I just taught a class with many foreign students, they don't understand the impact World War II had on the entire world and shaping the structure in which we live today. The salient fact of World War II was the killing of innocent people, direct targeting of civilian populations, the brutal murder or unjustified experimentation on human beings, the torture of human beings for no reason. The magnitude of the deaths in World War II is somewhere between 50 and 80 million people. Most of them were civilians. Now, after World War II, the world said, we never want to have a World War III. The experience of this is so horrible, we want to stop it. We never want it to happen again. And they formed the United Nations. Now, we have criticisms of the United Nations, and I have plenty of criticism of the United Nations, but you have to understand where that came from. It was after this untold suffering and brutality. And they issued this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which you're probably familiar with to some extent, but I want to read some portions from it to remind us of what the world, gathered in the United Nations, issued this declaration. There were no votes against it. There were some abstentions. Some communist countries abstained at the time. But the Universal Declaration, in its preamble, says, whereas the recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace. And whereas disregard for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts that have outraged the conscience of mankind, all those things I mentioned were the disregard of human rights. Concentration camps, mass murder, targeting of civilians. Whereas it is essential if man is to not to be compelled to have recourse, rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by law. Then the General Assembly recognizes these human rights, which it calls the common standard of achievement for all people. Okay, so what does this document say about religion? It says in Article 18, everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. The right includes freedom to change religion or belief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. I think that's a pretty good, pretty broad, pretty good definition. Now, I'm a lawyer. We have several lawyers here. And so the Universal Declaration is a declaration. It's a statement, but it's not legally binding. No nation is required to follow. In order to make, and there's many aspects to the Declaration, to make it binding, it's put into a treaty, and the treaty is then open to ratification by nation states. And the treaty that I want to talk about is the one called Civil and Political Rights. So this treaty aims to take the ideas here and put them in a document ratified by nations that bind those nations. What does it say about religious freedom? Again, in Article 18 of the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, it has what I think is a superb definition of religious freedom and a superb delineation of the freedom that religion should have in every society. Everyone, I'll read it to you. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Now, okay. This right shall include freedom to have or to adopt a religion, freedom either individually or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. So it's freedom to have it and freedom to express it, freedom to manifest it in public. You don't have to hide in your house. You're not just free to have your religious beliefs and you hide in your house. And you don't have to be alone. You have a right in community to express it and to express it in public. And then what I think is the fundamental premise of it all, of all religious freedom, is no one shall be subject to coercion, which would impair his freedom to have or adopt a religion. No coercion. Now, is it completely unlimited, that freedom? No. Article 18 says freedom to manifest one's religion. That's to manifest, not to have, but to manifest. So what you do kind of outside your house, outside your apartment, freedom to manifest one's religion may be subject, so only the limitations I'm going to mention. So there's not limitations on having. There's not limitations on that. But manifesting, could there be any limitations? Yes, if they're prescribed by law, so you have it written, and they're necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals, or the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. Now, there's a lot, we could have a whole conference on some weaknesses there, but the basic idea of Part 3 of Article 18 is there can be some limits on what you do outside your house in public, but they have to be, but they're limited limitations. They've got to be written and they have to be necessary for public health, safety, welfare, and respect for the fundamental freedoms of others. But, well, we can get into this in the question. So that's, I think, a pretty good statement. It's robust religious freedom, and it's not just individualized, it's in community. You don't have to keep it in your house. You can manifest it in public, and nobody can limit that. You can't be coerced in your religious beliefs. It would violate this. And there's another provision of this covenant on civil and political rights, which says that almost all of these rights could be suspended if there was a war or something that threatened the life of the nation. This is Article 4. In a time of public emergency which threatens the life of the nation, so in the most extreme circumstance where the life of the nation is at stake, it allows these freedoms to be suspended, but not religious freedom. It only lists 5 articles that you cannot suspend even if the life of the nation is at risk. One of them is religious freedom. So to me, is a ringing endorsement of the importance of religious freedom as part of the vision of the modern society formed after World War II in order to respect human rights. Religious freedom is not only recognized, it's broadly defined, and it is protected. That's the vision of this document. I'm not saying it's recognized all the time. I mean, it's realized all the time. Now, I want to, in that context, I want to talk for a minute about the United States of America. You're all sophisticated people, I'm sure you know this, but the American Constitution has a Bill of Rights, which are a collection of amendments to the Constitution, but they are integral to the Constitution because the Constitution would not have been ratified when the country was created if the Bill of Rights had not been attached. There were states, well, you know, back in when we created the United States, the states like where I'm from, North Carolina or Virginia or Massachusetts or Connecticut, they were more like sovereign countries, and they didn't want to give up any power. So the Constitution was presented, and some of the states said, no, we will not ratify it unless you have a Bill of Rights. So no Constitution unless a Bill of Rights. The first article of the Bill of Rights, the first phrase, protects religious freedom. So, and it's, some people say it's one clause, and some people say it's two. I think it's one clause, it's one idea, which is the government shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So the government cannot establish a religion, but it can do nothing to prohibit the free exercise of religion. So that was the American view. And we would have had no America if that hadn't been part of the Constitution. However, as Badri mentioned and others, John, I think Farina mentioned too, we have some massive problems in the United States today. And I'm going to talk for a minute about those problems, or some of those problems. Even though we have this First Amendment, we have some problems. Two of the problems that I'll mention are this I don't know how it would have been reported in the European press, but it is a requirement by the government that every institution provide insurance for contraceptives, and some of which are abortifacients. Now, religious institutions, colleges, universities, other religious nonprofits say, look, we can't provide insurance for this because it is against our moral and religious views. This would make us complicit in the provision of something we see as morally wrong. So the question for the national government was, should we have a rule like this, or should we allow the religious organizations to be exempt from it? There's a long, complicated thing here, which I could go into maybe at some point, or with some of you if you want to figure it out, but I want to talk more about it. But the bottom line is, Donald Trump, as president, is committed to removing this rule. So it will no longer be the rule. Hillary Clinton was committed to keeping the rule. And the consequences of the rule would have been that many religious colleges would have closed, and many religious hospitals would have closed. So you would have had a much more significant secularization of society. And, you know, we can, whatever you think about Donald Trump on any other issues, we can put over here. On this issue, if he was not president, within 4 years, we could very well have had Catholic institutions go out of business, Orthodox institutions, etc. So it's a big deal, and it's a big conflict. And it goes to the Supreme Court of the United States. John mentioned some Supreme Court cases. Well, in the United States, the biggest engine of kind of the social left really has been the judiciary. The only reason we have abortion in the United States is because the Supreme Court of the United States said it's implied in the right to privacy and the right to liberty in the Constitution, which I think is a manifest nonsense. But they said it, but they can unsay it. So you might have seen there's big controversy, or not controversy, there's a lot to do about a new person on the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court could overturn that, but the Supreme Court has been the engine of social change. The Supreme Court 2 years ago said that homosexuals have a right to marry on the same idea because of privacy and liberty. Not because the Constitution says there's a right to marry that extends to everything. There's no, it's an interpretation of the word privacy and liberty, which again I think is manifest nonsense. Now you might, if you want to give that right or protect that right, you would have to write it in. It doesn't seem to me it's up to the court to create it from the words privacy and liberty. So that's some of the problems we're facing in the United States. And then religious organizations, in light of this decision for same-sex marriage by the Supreme Court, have been sued because some things like a baker who provides wedding cakes does not want to provide a wedding cake to homosexual marriage because it violates his religious views. Can he be forced to do that in the sense that if he doesn't do it, he gets fines that drive him out of business? So that's those issues are very hot right now in the United States. So what can we do about it in the United States? How can we go forward to secure this right to religious liberty that's so protected in the international human rights documents, recognized in our own Constitution? One way we could do it is continuing litigation and legislation, and that's important. Those things are important. I wouldn't say that we don't do them, but that's like a fight without guns. That's a dog fight. There's a winner and a loser, and it's pretty. It doesn't do anything to reconcile people. So I'm involved in something that seeks to find a way to reconcile on some kind of friendly but common citizenship basis. We're developing some principles which will be issued by liberals, religious liberals, and religious conservatives probably in the fall. And I just tell you what some of these are. So there's the effort, you can keep fighting, you can change the Supreme Court, you can take court cases, you can pass laws, you can elect officials, all of which is important. But there's got to be some kind of civic reconciliation, because too many people see religion as irrational, therefore no need to even respect it. It's an irrational thing in society. So anyway, here's some of what we affirm, and what we're going to affirm in this document, that freedom of religion includes to have, to change, to teach, to worship, to observe, to share, and to participate. Freedom of religion is based on human dignity. For Christians or religious people, that's obvious, but I think for anybody else, the dignity of the human being. Human rights say every human being must be respected. So all you have to do is be a member of the human species, and your dignity is recognized. Religious freedom is not the gift of the state. It is not the gift of the state. It is a pre-political right that human beings have. And it is foundational for any democracy, any rule of law. Now, when there's conflict among rights, as there will be some conflict among rights, the solution should be determined. There should be a determined effort to resolve the matter through civil discourse and reasonable accommodation, so that everything is not, we call it a zero sum or ultimate win. You try to find a reasonable accommodation. Now again, there's the litigation side, but this is the side that seeks reconciliation without all that zero-sum conflict. Religious freedom is both an individual right and a community right. And I didn't read it to you, but the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights recognizes the rights of religious communities as well. It's not absent from here. It's not just individual rights. It recognizes the community rights and that they must be protected and they must be respected. Everyone has the right to express their religion in community. Religious freedom is necessary both to individual human flourishing and to societal flourishing. There shall be no coercion in religion. That's a quick glance at what we're trying to do, which I think reflects the principles of the Universal Declaration and of the American First Amendment, which is that religion is essential to society, religious freedom is essential to society, religious citizens are good citizens. They are not people to be feared or marginalized or suspected. They are absolutely part of what makes a good society. I think John Farina mentioned they're part of and contribute to the common good. And I just end with this quote from Martin Luther King, which I'm sure you all know is the great black civil rights leader who was also a pastor. In case you didn't know that, he was a pastor. He was a religious leader, and it was his religious conviction that led him to protest the injustice against black Americans who didn't have full civil rights. And he said, religion is not the master or the servant of the state, but is its conscience. And I would add, any state that loses its conscience has no future. Thank you.